Alrighty, another few seconds and we might just get started. All right, well look, now's as good a time as any. Thank you very much everyone for joining us. The first thing I'm going to do is just mention the acknowledgement of our country. We have a slide up at the moment just to quickly run through that. AusCERT, obviously we're part of the University of Queensland. We acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands in which we meet. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. That's obviously something we take quite seriously. We don't just put that slide up for the heck of it. So, thank you very much again for joining us. The reason we're doing these webinars, of course, is pretty obvious. We're not allowed to get out and about to come and see you all. And normally that's what we would have done. This is a brave new world with the COVID-19 situation. So big thanks to from Beck's team, Laura, who you can't see, she's off camera, but everything that happens here, of course, she's put it together. And she's got you in mind, obviously, our members. We want to obviously make sure that you're getting all of the information you can to make the most of the membership you have with us. And she's been working very hard to do that with these webinars and also the upcoming conference, which of course went virtual. So that's going to be a really exciting new world as well. Can't wait to see what they've got in store. They always keep a few little secrets from us, otherwise we'd let the cat out of the bag and tell you all. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how a virtual AusCERT conference runs. Anyway, let's just very quickly mention what we're going to do today in this session. This webinar is about the malicious URL feed, which is one of our services. You're all able to use that no matter what level of membership you have with us. So what we're going to do is a bit of a history of it, why it exists, a bit of an explanation of what it is. Then we're going to pivot a little bit to some roadmap ideas that we've got. Just obviously, you know, no one can rest on their laurels, and there's some new and exciting ideas that have come out of the analyst team on what we're going to do there. And then we have a special guest star today, Colby from the operations team. And he's starring as our tech presenter today, and he's actually going to walk through a couple of little examples of how you can use the malicious URL feed. All right, so why don't we jump straight into it? For those that know me well, you'll know that I came from an organisation that used AusCERT as a provider for many years, and it was one of the motivations I had to come and work here, obviously. But during that time, it was the late 2000s and early 2010s. During that time, obviously, phishing was a big thing. It still is. Back then, it was largely a problem that the banks had to face. The banks had some of their own methods of sharing that intelligence amongst themselves. AusCERT at the time was one of the very few, if not the first, I'd have to fact check that one, but it's certainly one of the few that were actually sharing some kind of concept of a feed of an indicator of compromise. Back then, URLs were probably the only IOC that anyone was sharing, IP addresses and URLs. We started doing that a very long time ago, well before I was lucky enough to come and work here. It's not an automated system. So contrary to a lot of beliefs, it's not just, you know, a honeypot that's sort of grabbing stuff, doing some analysis or artificial intelligence and then sticking it into a feed and giving it to our members. It's definitely not that at all. What we pride ourselves on is this is a high confidence and therefore low volume feed straight from the work that our analyst team are doing. So at any given moment, obviously they're looking at incidents that you might have brought to us, or they might be simply gathering information from, obviously we've got honeypots and things. We've also got a huge network of contacts around the AusCERT region. So that's Asia Pacific and, you know, about I think it's in the high 20s, almost 30 certs around this corner of the world, all band together and share intelligence. We get a lot of stuff through that network, which we then pass on to you through mechanisms like this malicious URL feed. The key there is that it's actually incorporated into our systems so that as the analysts are doing their work, they can effectively just click a button that says add to feed. And that means that it's very simple for them to do, but it means that there's actually a human pair of eyes analyzing what they're putting into that feed. So it's not just an automated output of a system. So we want you to be able to trust this feed. Obviously, everyone's human, and we can't put a hand on our heart and say there's never something in that feed that shouldn't be in there, but we are very, very careful about what we put in it. It's a case of, think before you click that button. We've also got some systems, checks and balances so that we don't accidentally, whitelist one of the universities or, one of the domains of our members, for example. So that's just a little bit of a history, I suppose, about why we've got it, what it does. You can use this feed, obviously, for a number of things. You can potentially block or alert the URLs in your environment so that you can know about phishing or malware dropping sites. You can use it for research purposes. There's a ton of things you can do. I guess by way of explanation of what it actually is that you can get out of the feed, you're all members. So maybe just pop across to the member portal and log in, have a look. You'll actually see a section there for the malicious URL feed, and there's a couple of different formats that you can download. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the technical section of the presentation. But the key facts to know there is it's updated every 5 minutes. Now, bear in mind, that's just an automated update of what the analysts are putting into it. So we don't have analysts sitting here at midnight putting stuff into the feed. However, if an analyst happened to be working on an incident late at night and found some malicious URLs or something, yeah, sure, they're going to pop into that feed. What that means, though, is the bulk of URLs and IP addresses that are added to it are generally between, the working hours of our analyst team, which just happens to be Australian Eastern Standard Time because we're here in Brisbane. So that's what you can find in it. Let's now pivot to what we're looking at doing with this feed in the future. So many of you, before coronavirus and we were allowed to get out and about, many of you said to us, look, we'd really like that feed to be in sticks format. So yeah, sure. Nowadays, a lot of vendors are honouring the sticks format. We don't have it in that format yet. It is definitely on the drawing board. And as little as, I think it was last week or early this week, one of the analysts was playing with a proof of concept for some new things we're looking at there. But at the moment, it is text-based or a custom XML. So you can get it in either format. What we generally do is if you say to us, hey, look, we're using Palo Alto technology, how do I get that into the system? We're aware, for example, just using the Palo Alto case again, we're aware that some members have used MindMeld, for example, which is Palo Alto's intel gathering system, have used that to actually get it into their Palo Alto firewalls or environment or whatever they're using. So we know that that one works. If you've got a separate vendor that you're not sure whether you can integrate this feed into or not, just point your friendly salesperson to me. Obviously, either contact me directly if you know me, or just contact the AusCERT team and they can pass it on to me. And what I do in that case is I'll say to the vendor, look, we've got a mutual customer and member who has your appliance and want to use our feed. Now, in every case where I've done that, with perhaps one exception, those vendors are extremely receptive to that. They'll say, great, can you just quickly give us access to your malicious URL feed so that I can reverse engineer it into our product and then make it available. So that's an easy win for you, and it takes very little of our time to set up. So I'm more than willing to do that. Just point your friendly local salesperson at me and I'll make that happen. In the future, So as I said, we are looking at the sticks format in future for this. Let me flip this and say, what I would encourage you to say to your friendly local salesperson is, does your appliance support the sticks format? That's pretty much the way the world's going, and it's very surprising these days if an appliance or firewall or whatever doesn't support that. But that's definitely something that you can push back on them and say, look, that's what you need to do so that you can ingest information, not only from AusCERT, but also from other providers of intelligence. We've often been asked, what's the difference between, say, a sticks file that the ACSC offers versus what AusCERT offers? And I'll say the same thing that I've always said about that. Remember your basic InfoSec principles, defense in depth. So don't just use our feed. Don't just use the ACSC stuff. There's going to be different things in those feeds. The ACSC has Five Eyes intelligence connections. We have connections with those AP CERT teams all around this region. They're very well versed at communicating with non-government teams like us. So we'll probably have things that the government doesn't have. Generally, what happens in the ACSC world is there'll be perhaps a major incident, and they'll actually publish a sticks file that you can log into the ACSC portal and grab and then put into your appliance. Our approach is a little different in that we just have a continuous feed. So it's updated every 5 minutes, as I said. There's some aging rules, obviously. We don't just leave URLs in there. They do age out after a 14-day period. But our approach is just to make that a constant feed that you can grab. There'll only be, a few hundred URLs in it at any given time, but those are the ones that, you need to look for and or block. The ACSC obviously will make those files available at the time of an incident. So it's best to grab them both. So pivoting now again to a little bit more future stuff, and I'm going to hand over to Colby very shortly, but one of the things that we've been looking at is, what do you actually want? What indicators do you want? And when I've asked you that question, many have said, well, we want more than just URLs. What about, I don't know, a hash of a binary, malicious binary, sender, email address? There's tons of different IOCs that you could be using. So what we're looking at doing is making some of those indicators also available in the member portal. But that's obviously, this is a roadmap. So please don't quote me and say Mike said that's going to happen tomorrow. It's a work in progress, but we are responding to what you've told us you want in that regard. URLs, obviously there's limited usefulness because of the fact that some of us aren't doing SSL inspection, and you might actually not be able to see URLs to block them or alert on them in the first place. So we acknowledge that, and we're working on getting additional things into that portal for you down the track. So I think I've hopefully covered most of the questions that you sent us in the feedback form that Laura sent out as part of this registration. If I haven't, please pop them in the Q&A, and we'll do questions at the end. But what I'll do right now is hand over to Colby. Hopefully he's ready, and I'm going to put myself on mute. Thanks, Colby. It's over to you.
Cool. Thank you, Mike. Well, I think a lot of the stuff I'm going to go over is I'll try not to overlap too much with what Mike's talked about. But yeah, just kind of running on from that last thing that he was mentioning of members are asking for more than just URLs. Because I guess from the perspective of an analyst, it's very easy to say this URL is malicious and this URL is not. But if you're taking the next step to say, this domain is malicious or this IP address is malicious, there's a lot more investigation you have to go through to make sure that you're not squashing anything in like a CDN or anything like that. And that's essentially where we tried to go with MISP to make it, this big sharing group where you have, all of these different types of indicators. And I think for some of our members, it's been extremely successful, but at the same time, for some of our members, it's been extremely intimidating. Whereas the malicious URL feed has always been quite easy to ingest. So like if you log into our web portal and you go to your main member view, one of the little sections you'll have is this little segment saying malicious URL feeds. And I wouldn't recommend just logging in and downloading all of these feeds, because the whole point of them is they have to be current with data. Like a URL that's malicious today may not necessarily be malicious tomorrow. Everything you should do is you should always try to integrate it with the API. There'll be a little thing hovering just underneath it saying like your API key, and you can grab that API key, and we've put in like different little examples of how to kind of pull this down. So you just have these little snippets of here's what it looks like to pull down the API from PowerShell, Python, and Bash, which tends to cover most of our implementations, but lots of, ideally, your firewall like appliance or your mail filtering or something like that would integrate directly with this, because a lot of those things will support, you know, some kind of external list where you can put in a HTTP endpoint and hopefully a custom header, which is the API key. And maybe your appliance can just talk directly to our malicious URL feed, but it's not always the case. So a little bit of background of like how this all kind of works, and Mike's kind of alluded to that of, we do have internal systems of, as analysts are processing these different URLs and stuff like that, they do just have a button which kind of sends it to the feed. But essentially, before that's even happened, there's still a lot of stuff going on in the background. So, you know, one of the big sources of data we get is from members sending us information. It's definitely not limited to that, but whenever we do receive any of these URLs in this context, we're going out and doing a lot of pre-processing before an analyst looks at it. And this is an internal tool that one of our analysts created, which is really, really useful. And you can see kind of like under that little email bubble, there's this little bit of yellow text which says SEL Microsoft. And that's an example of we're running Selenium, which is one of the things which goes out and takes like pictures of what the website looks like and downloads the HTML and tries to guess if it is a phishing website, what brand is it trying to impersonate? Like, is it impersonating Office 365? And by the time an analyst actually comes and looks at it, they'll have all of that at their fingertips, and they will kind of go back and submit it. And you can see like after the analyst, which is the little happy face there, this is one where Selenium has said, I think it's Westpac, pretending to be a Westpac login portal. And an analyst has gone back through our ticketing system and confirmed that it is indeed Westpac. And all of that internally for us is stored in a MISP instance where we're tracking all of the different malicious URLs. And the main reason we do stuff like that is, you know, we're trying to make MISP where we're storing all of our threat intel, but we're also tracking other cool stuff like, this is like a screenshot as to how we track the website after we first submit something. So everything that goes into our malicious URL feed, we don't just throw it up there and forget about it forever. The Osprey tool, which is our internal tool for tracking all of this stuff, it will go and take these screenshots from Selenium, take extra stuff like what IP is it resolving to, has it shown up in Google Safe Browsing yet, different things like that. And we will track it and just kind of look for any significant changes to see, you know, have we gotten this taken down, or have they gone and put something else in their website to try to hide away from things like Google Safe Browsing to try to stay up for longer. And yeah, it kind of gives you like a bit of a background as to what's going on when you're actually sending us stuff and how things end up into the feed. And through all these different steps, we do have all the different whitelisting, but it does get quite difficult, especially when you're processing a URL feed. Domain feed would be quite easy to put in a bunch of whitelists, but a lot of the times we'll have a quite legitimate domain which is hosting malicious content. A really good example is Dropbox. Like it's always hosting malicious content, but if we went and blocked Dropbox, I think we'd make a lot of people very unhappy. So the main ways that you would have to integrate URLs is quite difficult, because if any of your clients are reaching out to these URLs, generally everything's HTTPS, and everything should be encrypted with TLS. And if everything is encrypted with TLS, you can't see the full URL path that they're going to. If you are going to the extent of running a full HTTP proxy where you are terminating all that TLS in a very closed and managed environment, then you definitely can go and do all of this stuff. And one of the things we get asked a lot about is like Palo Alto, for example. We're running a Palo Alto firewall. How do we integrate with some of this stuff? And I don't have access to running up a full proxy setup or like a full border firewall Palo Alto. But from kind of going through the documentation, they have this reference to a external dynamic list. So from what I've seen, this is how you would integrate it. And I would love if someone does have access to a Palo Alto. I may end up running my own to kind of go through and test this stuff, but please reach out to me on like Slack or something like that. And I'd love to kind of go through and try to help you integrate this, so that if you are able to integrate it, then I would love to document it for more of our members. But this is an example of something which can't directly integrate with the feed that we have, because you'll see in this description, which is from their public documentation, is all of the URLs in a external list that they want to reference doesn't have the protocol out the front. So all these URLs don't have HTTP or HTTPS out the front of all of them. And it's very easy to just take the Python snippet from our website of the example of how to pull down a feed. And this is just like that little snippet where you've added in this little regex option and just say strip off HTTP and HTTPS from the start of it. This is the kind of stuff that we would like to go through and do, and maybe do some of this pre-processing on our side, that hopefully we could, instead of just presenting the malicious URL feed, maybe we could present the malicious URL feed in a Palo Alto format, in some kind of other format that these things will happily accept, so that all of our members aren't having to go through and reintegrate the same thing. And just kind of like the last thing I wanted to show, this is a very rough graph. About 50% of the stuff that we're getting through, probably more than half, is HTTPS. So when it comes to that proxy thing, you do need a proxy intercepting all of that encrypted communication to block HTTPS. But even if you're just running a border firewall, you can go through and block all of those HTTP URLs, which doesn't seem that impressive, because it's so easy these days, especially with stuff like Let's Encrypt, to set up this dodgy little phishing website with HTTPS. But there really is just like such a low bar for setting up phishing pages, that still so many of them are still running on HTTP. But realistically, blocking stuff on your firewall, blocking stuff on your proxy is really nice and really ideal. But as far as URLs coming into your environment, you really want to make sure that the main way of URLs coming in is email, which, email is still just like that terrible scum of malicious URLs floating all around. And it's pretty much the only way that, or the vast majority of the way that all of the people on your network will end up clicking on all of these malicious links or being routed to these. And if you are operating in like a working from home environment and you're not you know, sending everyone through like a VPN or something like that. I know we have a lot of universities who are all sending emails out to all of their students who are all at home at the moment. And if they receive a phishing email and they click on it, they're definitely not going to be routed through anything where you'll be able to block it. So realistically, URLs is a great thing to integrate with your email filtering system. And if anyone has, I've tried to kind of look up some of the popular stuff like Mimecast. So if anyone has access to that, I'd love to have a chat with you on Slack to see what we could kind of do to hopefully integrate that. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have, unless there's any questions you have, or Mike.
Thanks heaps, Colby. There is one question so far. If there's any other questions, please drop them in the Q&A right now, and we'll run through them. So Robert just asked before if there's a list of vendors where there's instructions on how to integrate the feed. And the reason I said we'll answer that live is obviously Colby's just walked us through all the complexities of that. At the moment, we don't have that list for many of those reasons, but we would like to build that up. So at the moment, the best thing is just to reach out to us and say, we have this brand of appliance or this investment in firewall tech or whatever, and you know that will give us the I guess the hit list to go to each of the vendors in order of what our members are asking us to do. So hopefully that answers your question, Robert. I know it's not ideal, we don't have a list, but we want to build that up. Okay, are there any other questions? We're coming up to the time, but we've still got a couple of minutes left if anyone would like to ask any questions. Oh, good question, Phil. I actually don't know. Colby, I'm sure we can probably get that from our, how many members are actually using the feed. We can probably get those stats from our portal, but I'm not sure if we have it at the moment.
I don't have it on hand, but we definitely do have the stats. One thing that is kind of interesting is I'm not sure fully where the reasoning comes from, but we do have a malware URL feed and a phishing URL feed. And there's not a huge point to that from my perspective of running infrastructure, because a malicious URL is malicious. So we have like a combined feed, which is both of them together, and then just phishing and just malware. The vast majority of people are using the combo feed. And at the moment we have the text format, which is just all the URLs, new line separated. And we also have this XML format, which does give a little bit of extra information, like the timestamp of when it was published and things like that. But it is an XML, which I can say I'm not the biggest fan of. So again, like the vast majority of people are just using that new line separated thing so that they don't have to go through and process it or anything. All they care about is malicious URL is malicious.
Yeah, whereas like versus whether it's actual malware or phishing. I think, and because this predates everyone at AusCERT at the moment, I think those are separated because in the old days they did actually want that separation for like statistics on banking phishes and things like that. Plus there was also a separate feed called the mule feed. Remember when money mules were a big thing? So a list of email addresses that were muling money out of banks. So I think that's just a carryover of those days. But if there's anyone that's been around AusCERT longer than I have that can clear that one up, that'd be interesting to know. We've had another a comment from Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous. These IRCs could be integrated into endpoint detection and response systems. Absolutely. So if you've got vendors or examples of those things deployed in your environments, we'd love to have a crack at it. So yeah, same thing. Please just drop into member Slack and maybe get in touch with one of the analysts. Colby's sticking his hand up. Hopefully you won't all flood him with requests, but we would like to actually jump on these things. So Cool. We are pretty much out of time, so I might wrap up unless there are any more questions. I'll give it 3, 2, 1. Okay, no more questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again for the next one.